Hello, I'm Bob Butler from KCBS Radio in San Francisco. Welcome to a forum on Measure V, which is on the ballot in November. Today's forum is sponsored by the Contra Costa Elections Division, the Contra Costa Television, the League of Women Voters of Diablo Valley, and the League of Women Voters of West Contra Costa County. We're recording these roundtables here in the studios of Contra Costa Television. The El Cerrito Measure V asked that voters establish El Cerrito as a charter city and a real estate property transfer tax of $12 per thousand, providing the city with $2.7 million a year. The money would be used to better maintain emergency services and response times for city parks, programs for children, adults, and families, library programs, and other general services. Speaking in opposition to the measure is Jack Weir of the Contra Costa Tax Association, and El Cerrito Council member Paul Fideli is in favor of the measure. We do lots before the show to determine the speaking order, so we'll start with Jack Weir. Jack, what's wrong with this measure?
I want to thank the Elections Department. I want to thank KCBS, Bob, League Women Voters, and Community TV for this opportunity to talk about this measure. This measure violates virtually every standard we use at the Contra Costa Taxpayers Association to evaluate tax measures. And I do want to say, although we have the reputation of opposing any and all tax measures, that is not true. We evaluate all tax measures, and there are tax measures that we actually support. This is certainly not one of them. This is actually two separate measures in one bill, and that's not right. It's a deceptive measure because the real purpose behind this is to raise more money to pay for unfunded public employee pensions. And secondly, we're very unhappy about the fact that the city used so much taxpayer money to actually promote this measure, and that's a violation of what we think of as good government.
Thanks. Mr. Fideli, you're on the City Council. I'm assuming you support Measure V.
We do.
Tell me why.
Well, we're actually supporting this to become a charter city because we're trying to get something that we had about 15 years ago. We used to be able to have the authority to apply real property transfer tax, and through litigation and Proposition 62, it was taken away from us. So we're trying to become a charter city so that we can do what our other neighboring cities do right now: Richmond, Berkeley, San Rafael, Alameda, Emeryville, to add some revenue, a one-time tax, and we're not being deceptive about anything. It's a tax and it's a charter that we're going to become so that we can serve the quality of life of El Cerrito. We have our citizens care about the quality of life, and we have fire hazards, libraries, police that we need to respond to, and our public process has led us to the point that the charter city is something we want to let the voters vote on.
If I have a house in El Cerrito and I sell my house, who gets the property transfer tax?
The tax can be decided upon the buyer or the seller. And sometimes when I go out and talk to people in El Cerrito, I ask how many people own a home and who wants to sell. Nobody raises their hand. None of them will pay this tax. If in fact you do sell and you don't want to pay this tax, the seller can say, I'm not selling my house. I want the buyer to pay for this. And in El Cerrito, I just want to make a point, as no other city that's a charter city, we allow a third of that tax, the transfer tax, to become rebates for water conservation, EV, or solar conservation. So there's a payback to the community for the values that we have in our city, and also it can improve the buyer or the city's home as they decide that.
As I was reading this, it sounds like if I sold my house and I paid that transfer tax, you want to establish this measure so El Cerrito gets the money. Who gets the money now?
We don't have that tax now, so we can't get it now. We need to become a charter city because in California, only charter cities can get real property transfer tax. And we made it very clear. It's a very narrow request that we have on the ballot to become a charter, and we're saying up front, this is a tax on real property transfer tax. And it's a one-time tax, $12 per thousand, and our citizens have demanded a variety of services that we have in El Cerrito. Our budget is barely balanced, and we need to find revenue. This is the way that gets the most money by the least number of people impacted.
Jack, don't most cities have this property transfer tax?
No, and there are two kinds of cities in California. Most cities are general law cities, which means they have to conform to a whole set of state laws about the way general cities can do business. There are many restrictions. One example is general law cities can, city council members can only that can only give themselves raises not more than 5%. An example of something that a charter city can do is they don't have that restriction, nor a number of other restrictions that apply to general law cities. For El Cerrito to be compared to a city like Richmond, for example, is really a disservice to the people of El Cerrito. Richmond is known throughout the state as a fiscally unsound city government. They teeter constantly on the brink of insolvency. So I would hate to see El Cerrito go in a way that that puts them in that situation.
In reading on this, I'm confused, and I'm imagining that people in El Cerrito, when they read this ballot measure, they're going to be confused about it. What do you say to them that they will vote yes?
I'm going to say, let me just say, last Monday at our El Cerrito City Council meeting, it was full of people that wanted us to have a disaster response team for fire in El Cerrito. Our budget is barely balanced with no revenue in sight. We as City Council would be negligent if we didn't try to find additional revenue sources that we already had 15 years ago. We're losing, at the last 15 years, about $1 million a year coming into our budget. We've got a library, we have fire and police services, affordable housing, and fire response that we need to attend to. This is the way that only people that sell their house will they once get a bill for this, and they can have rebates on this. So the majority, 99% of El Cerritos will never be impacted by it. And the committee that put this together and moved this toward the ballot, real estate agents were on board, labor, and they're in this market in the East Bay, there's no problem with buyers coming in and saying, I'll take that as part of the deal in buying this home.
If El Cerrito, you're saying that this is just totally wrong. Do they get property taxes?
Yes, they do.
They get property taxes, they get the sales taxes. You're saying that this is just too much.
Well, if you look at a typical El Cerrito property owner's tax bill that they get, there are over a dozen taxes that they pay, some of which the voters themselves approved, and they get a share of the county tax. I absolutely agree with one thing that my opponent said, and that is that El Cerrito does have a serious revenue problem. But I think if you look at what has happened to business in El Cerrito over the past 10 years, the city has completely failed to develop an economic and business development plan to attract and keep those businesses that produce sales tax and property tax and whatnot. They don't even have a Target store anymore. El Cerrito residents have to travel to another city to make those kinds of purchases. The other thing I want to say is, one thing about charter cities is true. There are a number of cities in California that have gone bankrupt, and every single one of them was a charter city. So to me, I see absolutely no reason why El Cerrito would want to go in that particular direction.
Regarding Target, regarding stores in El Cerrito, what is the council doing to attract and keep businesses?
Well, that's an economic development question, and a lot of what's happened is we're recovering from the recession and a changing dynamic of the workforce. And it's not stores and box stores coming in anymore. Those are leaving, and it's purchasing at home. Right now, El Cerrito, around our BART stations and around San Pablo Avenue, a tremendous amount of growth is happening. 2,000 housing units are happening. We're creating demand to bring the services in. We've had 5 restaurants open in the last year and a half. We're excited about what's happening.
So you have homes coming in, but people that buy those homes won't have to pay any kind of a tax on it? Is that right?
Not unless that deal with the purchaser, they agree to accept that. It's between the seller and the buyer who would pay this. So again, the people living in El Cerrito now would not have to pay if they don't want to. They can say, I'm not going to sell unless someone takes and purchases this transfer tax.
Will it become part of like the closing costs?
It's part of the closing costs, part of the many things that you have to pay now to the county and other places now. And one thing I just want to say about the assets to our property in El Cerrito, the quality of life in El Cerrito, we're a full service city. We provide recycling, swimming pool, rec, great parks, trails. There's a cost to that, and there's a value to that, and the value is registered in the home values going up. So when that house is sold, we believe the people coming in can contribute, help us with our quality of life, and that's something that will go to the voters. The voters will decide whether or not that's something that they want to do.
Jack, what solutions do you have for El Cerrito aside Measure V?
I think the most important thing, and incidentally, we just completed a study of the unfunded pension obligation for all 19 Contra Costa cities, 4 of whom have zero unfunded pension debt because they don't offer guaranteed benefit plans like El Cerrito and the others do. The most serious financial problem El Cerrito faces is that they have currently a $59 million unfunded pension obligation. And in order to try to catch up with those payments, and that happened because benefits were overpromised and they were deliberately underfunded in order to make more room in the operating budget for raises and things like that. We know that the pension payments that El Cerrito City is going to have to pay to try to catch up are going to increase almost double over the next 5 years. So the solution is to find ways to start aggressively attacking that unfunded pension obligation, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. It's going to require the city and the unions and the public to sit down and open the books and come up with some ways of starting to move in the right direction. I might mention that those cities in Contra Costa that do offer those plans are over $1 billion in debt for unfunded pension obligations. And keep in mind, these pension obligations are for work that was performed in the past. It has no current value to any resident or property owner at the moment. This is for work done in the past.
So what do you do about this? This is not the only city that has these problems. In fact, I know my wife was telling me she worked for a city in the East Bay, and they couldn't offer adequate raises to like police and fire, so they put it on the back end in the pensions, and they loaded up the pensions. Now they have to pay for it. Is it the same situation in El Cerrito?
I don't have all the details in front of me, but as you say, every city is dealing with this pension issue. It's not unique to El Cerrito, and I want to make clear that on the ballot, we list the things that we would pay for with the real property transfer tax, and you mentioned those. Those are not things, pension is not mentioned. It's up to our city council, including me, to make decisions about where that money coming in will go to. And our priorities are fire and disaster, library, police, and affordable housing. Those are things, this money will go into a pot. Our reserve is down to 3%. We need a bigger reserve so that, like Santa Rosa and other cities, we can respond to a fire. We're by Wildcat Canyon, East Bay Regional Parks are just up over the hill. One match could put our city into a disaster. That's what this is about. When I mention this to people in the fire issues, they're for this because they're not going to be paying a daily tax. It's the people, a house being sold one time, and we will get up to $2.7 million that we can put in our reserves to deal with the crisis.
That'll be every year, you think?
Every year, yes, up to 2.7.
Jack, what are you hearing from I say your constituents, but obviously we're talking about taxpayers. What are you hearing from people?
I hear a variety of things. I hear from seniors who've lived in their homes for a long time, and many of them are on fixed or low income, and many of them know at some point in time they're going to have to move out of their old family home and move into different facilities, which are very, very expensive. And the average working family in Contra Costa has very little set aside for their own retirement benefits other than the equity in their home. For the city to come in and grab a huge portion of that equity in the home is really onerous, and it's really going to hit the older citizens. I might also say that I absolutely agree that El Cerrito needs a much more aggressive expense management program, and I just noticed that the city manager, the former city manager who just retired with an annual cost of compensation to the city of over $300,000, including salaries and benefits. And I might mention that that's about $100,000 a year more than the governor of California paid. So I think the lesson for El Cerrito and a number of other cities is you have to learn to live within your means, just like working families in El Cerrito and throughout the county have to do.
So if I got a $500,000 home that I sell at $12, we're talking about what, $6,000 would be the transfer tax, and that would be paid by either.
But a third of that can be rebates on solar, water conservation, and EV, which can benefit either the buyer or the seller. Let them negotiate when they sell a home. The vast majority, 99% of El Cerritos will not be impacted on this increase, and we will get money in our reserves to deal with crises and disasters.
What other cities in the county have this real estate transfer tax?
He mentioned Richmond. We don't have the same economy or the same issues as Berkeley, Alameda, and Emeryville have the same exact $12 per thousand that we have. Berkeley is higher. San Francisco, Oakland are higher than us. So the council basically deals with the priorities of the money coming in. And we're hoping that the money that does come in, if this passes and if our voters approve this, we will keep that in reserve for a while to make sure what our priorities are. And one thing I want to make clear is in this charter, we didn't touch some of the labor issues. We didn't touch the election issues. We made it very clear to our voters that we're becoming a charter to simply do this one transfer tax so that we can build our reserves up. And that's what we're trying to do, and it will be up to the voters to decide.
Why didn't you make it two separate ballot measures?
Because our legal advisor said it's best to do one. We didn't want to have one be a charter without this authority. We'd have to go back to the ballot box again, or have the authority without being a charter. And anything we decide on a charter case will have to go back to the ballot box. This is the only thing we're voting on now. Nothing else that we do will change unless it goes back to the voters to change the priorities of.
I asked Jack what he's hearing from his constituents, taxpayers. What are you hearing at council meetings about this?
As I said, last Monday, we had 3 people come up and say, we hope the charter money can go to fire reconnaissance, preparation, response, and I'm all for that. We need to have that, and I'm scared about the hillside and our trails. I'm also hearing that people didn't know that we had this authority before. It was taken away through a proposition and legal battles and arbitration. We simply want what we had back. Had we had that $1 million over 15 years annually, our city and our quality of life would even be better, and probably we could address some of our pension issues over the long haul.
Jack, I asked you about some solutions for El Cerrito. You're talking about attracting and keeping businesses. That seems like an easy solution. It sounds simple, but it isn't that simple, is it?
It depends on the political will of the city council and how important economic development is. There are a number of cities in Contra Costa that also have serious unfunded pension obligations, but they've been much more assertive about developing the general tax base, both in terms of property taxes and sales taxes, to help finance the city's essential services. And so the other thing that I'm hearing is, and I want to remind people that in the 2016 election, there were 43 ballot measures on the Contra Costa ballot. In the primary that we just got through, there were dozens of measures. There are 25 measures on the November ballot. We find that voters are becoming numb. They're being hit with this constant flood of new taxes or new fees, and they're all characterized in different ways. And I might want to point out, this is just some of the material that the city produced at taxpayer expense to promote this particular measure. Opposition people like us, we don't have access to taxpayer money to state our particular case. So we urge voters to absolutely turn this down, but we're willing to work with the city to help find ways of addressing its biggest problem, which is $59 million of unfunded pension obligations.
How much did you have to spend on all these flyers?
I don't know the number, but we're totally allowed to do that.
Right.
We're not supposed to promote something, but if the city council moves on a project and puts a ballot measure on, our city can educate on the website and through the mail on this. So I don't know about a word or two you may have of concern inside those, but we're educating El Cerritans about what's on the ballot for them.
What about working with the Taxpayers Association to come up with another solution? Or is it too late for that?
It's too late for this. I mean, Measure V will be on the ballot in less than 2 months. We're always willing and open to hear about folks. We have finance director there. Come on over. And bring us business. You know, every city has it's a different economic environment. We're next to Berkeley, next to Richmond, 2 different cases. Every city has its own economic history and path forward, and we're very excited about our 2 transit-oriented development areas around our BART stations and San Pablo Avenue. We have a great history of art. El Cerrito is, and we're finding an influx of young people coming to El Cerrito because it is still affordable, even with this concept. We have people that are served on our panel and our committee to move this forward that are young and saying, let's keep the quality of life in El Cerrito the way it is.
A lot of cities in Alameda, Contra, Costa counties have a lot of open space.
Yes.
And they're building homes, which is going to bring in some tax revenue. Do you have that kind of open space in El Cerrito?
We have 2 BART stations, and we're going to be building dense around our 2 BART stations and along San Pablo Avenue, which is a state highway. And half of it happens to be Richmond. If a lot of people don't realize that half of San Pablo Avenue, half of the way down, is a different city, even though it looks like it's El Cerrito. So that's where we're building, and we're going to bring people in to encourage services and density. And because of that, we need this extra pot of money reserves from this charter to become a charter city, and we can get the biggest buck for less people being impacted by this tax.
What other benefits do you get from being a charter city besides being able to charge a transfer tax?
We could make decisions locally on our elections, term limits, municipal rules that are there. We can change certain labor laws and fees paid for public works projects. We specifically said in this that we were not going to do that. We're being very honest with our residents that we're only doing this for this tax. And El Cerritans listen and learn, and they're willing to pay for a better El Cerrito and the quality of life.
Who makes those decisions now?
Which decisions?
You talked about if you're a charter city, you can make decisions on elections and things like that. Who makes those decisions now?
The state has a recipe for general law cities, and you must follow that recipe. If the citizens of El Cerrito decide we should be a charter city, then we get to decide what things might go to the ballot next time for them to vote on. They will have to vote on those changes that we will have to make.
I see. Jack, we're almost out of time, but the Contra Costa Tax Association is very active in looking at these kinds of issues. It's not just El Cerrito that has this kind of a problem. What other cities do you think have similar issues? We know about the pensions, but how many others have put a measure on the ballot to try to solve it?
We don't see any in Contra Costa County, although we note that Richmond, which is already a charter city, has a similar real property transfer tax measure, which we absolutely oppose. One of the reasons we're really focusing on this is because we see a trend throughout the state. And our position is generally government is spending more than it's taking in, and it's spending money on things that really don't benefit the taxpayers. And what we find is when one city or one agency discovers, oh, here's a way to get a new tax or a fee passed, the next thing you see is many other agencies facing similar financial challenges. We call that the copycat thing. And so we're concerned about this whole concept of a combination charter city, real property transfer tax, becoming something that other agencies that have severe financial challenges may decide to try to do. The other point I want to make is this proposal is designed so it only requires a simple majority, which means the money goes into the general fund. And the council, this council, future councils can use that money for anything they want. If they were really committed to using this money for public safety and so forth, they could have gone for a 2/3 vote, which would have guaranteed that any money collected would have gone into a lockbox account to be used for that and only that purposes. That's not what's happening here.
What assurances can you make to voters that you're not going to do what Jack is saying?
We list on the ballot measure the things that we will spend it on. And the El Cerrito City Council voted for those things. And also, it is a majority vote. We want to win this. It's not a 2/3 vote. Those are all things that our city citizens say they want to keep the quality of life in El Cerrito. All the things on that ballot. And we're not going to spend differently. I could tell you my priorities, but we got 4 other votes on the council that I don't want to speak for.
Okay. Well, thank you to our representatives for answering some of these important questions. Paul Fedeli from the City Council of El Cerrito and Jack Weir from the Contra Costa Tax Association. We now have time for closing statements, and you have 1 minute to make your case. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you. I've mentioned quality of life a lot. I'm very proud of El Cerrito's quality of life. We have great schools, great parks, recreational facilities, new housing is coming in. We're a great transit community, but we have a lot of things that we need as well. Fire and safety, fire security issues, more affordable housing. Those are things that cost money, and we're barely budgeted. As I also mentioned, the City Council was full last week of people demanding that we do more for fire, so that we're not a Santa Rosa, we're not like Reading. That's something that we need to do, and this is the direction that we believe we should do this. It would be negligent of our City Council if we didn't find other ways to provide financial security for our community. Go to our website, look at the issues involved with being a charter city. I hope you'll vote for this Measure V. Thank you very much.
Jack.
We oppose this measure for reasons that I've already mentioned, but the bottom line is this whole concept that government always has to cost more has spread like wildfire throughout California at every level, the state level, the regional level, the county level, and at the city level. That's not the way it works in private industry, and it doesn't work that way for working families. They simply have to learn to live within their means. El Cerrito taxpayers already pay an enormous amount of tax. El Cerrito passed one of the highest sales tax increases in the state. In fact, they had to get a waiver from the state legislature to increase their sales tax above the 10% cap for general cities. So this government and most of the other governments in the county that face this tremendous unfunded pension problem simply have to find ways to manage their money without tapping into the taxpayers' wallets one more time. So we strongly urge a no vote on this measure.
I want to thank Jack Weir from the Contra Costa Tax Association, Paul Fedeli from the El Cerrito City Council. For more information on this issue, visit the website votersedge.org. To view this broadcast online, go to cocovote.us. I'm Bob Butler from KCBS Radio. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to vote on November 6th. The deadline to register is October 22nd.